Good afternoon, everyone. Just give it a couple of minutes here to get everyone into the room. All right, everyone, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds here. And just a few more seconds. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again for our Friday webinar series. Today's webinar is Anger Happens, Coping During COVID-19. My name is Brett Spatella, and I'm the Vice President of Advancement here at the National Hemophilia Foundation. At any point during the webinar, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We have NHF staff members monitoring these questions, which we will pose to the panel after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to the community beginning on Monday, June 29th. I'd like to introduce our panelists this afternoon. Christi Humphrey is a licensed clinical social worker from the Hemophilia of Georgia, and Jhon Velasco is the Manager of Education and Training here at the National Hemophilia Foundation. We thank them for taking the time to join us, and now I'll turn it over to Christi to get us started. Christi.
Hey everybody, it's really good to be here today to talk to you about a really important topic, anger. One of my favorite quotes is by Terry Pratchett. Just because it's not nice does not mean it's not miraculous. On a mass scale, we humans are taking on systemic racism, profound economic crisis, illness, or even people who are vulnerable when they're healthy, and of course dying. Mortal fear is very real for us right now. There is no escape from this process. It's kind of all around us. And by the way, this has always been all around us. But our society is in flux in a way that's unprecedented. Suffering is kind of everywhere you look. And we feel something about that. So anger is happening. And in this time, people are talking in a larger way about emotions than I have ever seen in my 27-year career. No one is responding with this dismissive, I'm fine anymore. Everybody's working with something, some kind of stress in their life, a change, and they believe something about it, and they feel something about it. So we have an opportunity. We can use this time to know ourselves and our society better, see our long-standing patterns, and make some decisions. This is the challenge and the silver lining of interesting times. In these Friday sessions, stress management has already been covered and pain has been covered as well. This has given wonderful information. And today we're going to further those discussions. Slide. Goodness. So, anger. As a social worker, nothing is more important than exploring the shadows of ourselves. Anger is generally not discussed in polite society. It makes people uncomfortable and scared. Most people have negative experiences of anger. We want to get away from it, like our fella in this graphic. We have never really been taught what to do with anger. Most messaging is, make other people's comfortable, don't be angry. That gives us a dilemma if we have a healthy brain. If we don't have mad, sad, glad, and afraid, then we've got a problem. The action is not, don't feel angry. The question is what to do with it. How can we make our anger constructive? So the shadows must be seen. Anger is just another opportunity. And so we need to talk a little bit about the role of anger. This is a very normal emotion as a threat to a response. So basically what happens in the body is we have a sympathetic nervous system. It causes arousal. It uses two different parts of the emotion center, the amygdala and the hippocampus, and we're flowing with adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, and corticosteroids. Wonderful short-term solutions to threat, because it activates our bodies in order to be able to push forward and to do something about the threat that's in front of us. One interesting thing about anger is it actually affects the pleasure center of the body as well. And so understanding that there are side effects to this primary cascade is important. Slide. So fear, pain, and anger all stimulate the same stress cycle in the body. So people that are angry, are in fear, or in pain are in a biochemically altered state. And once again, we need to understand that it actually has an addictive quality too, because it is stimulating the left brain part that is the pleasure center. So long-term exposure to these biochemicals can impact our health over and over again. We can start to see problems with heart disease, problems with digestion, problems with the logic center. Literally what happens is that the amygdala has the power to shut us down. We literally can't think when we are in anger. And so since the sympathetic nervous system is a deviation from the baseline, and anger, pain, and stress are all doing the same thing in the body, you can see this very interesting reaction. Higher stress equals higher pain. Higher pain equals more anger. More anger equals more pain. All of these things interact on a regular basis. So we do need to understand the primary activation so that we can start to find the antidotes to anger that live in the body. Slide. Most of what we're up against is our primary nature. Please understand everything on this slide is about normal psychology. So the brain does have a negative skew. This is 100% about the fact that when the brain has a negative skew and the mind is wandering, we believe these very vivid, very deep thoughts. And most of these thoughts, when we're wandering, are guilt and fear-based. So the new psychology is telling us that there's something like 70% of the things we think are not helpful to us. And so it's wildly important to remember that we are up against something when we're working with anger. And slide. And then one more slide. Gender differences. There really aren't a lot of gender differences in males and females as far as the biochemical reaction that happens into the body, but men, it is more okay for them to be aggressive, and women have to have more subtle displays. It is wildly important for women to really look at sadness and determine whether or not that's really anger, and for men to look at anger and determine if that's really sadness. Next slide. A little bit about depression and anger. Please understand that this has the same primary root emotion. And so we do have reactions to that root emotion that can either be about withholding, which would be more about depression, or lashing out, which would be more about anger. So the question in the midst of this is there really a third option? Do we just have to do these two things? And the answer is yes. So next slide. One of the things in working with anger that we need to be very aware of is this idea of bitterness. It is a complex emotion, not a base one. And it's very distinct from depression. Depression has a lot of sadness in it and a lot of hopelessness in it. Bitter has a lot of energy, and the emotions are not stunted. Bitterness is also related to life stressors. Stress is viewed through the lens of justice. Not right, not fair, should not be happening. The thought process and value system are huge within the development of bitterness. And you can influence the thought processes and the value system since those things are learned. One of my favorite definitions of stress is a belief that you can't cope with a challenge. Bitterness develops from a sense that coping is not possible. Slide. So the effects of bitterness are more of the same. Once again, the side effects of the stress cycle, since bitterness has that component as well. But there's also mind components too, similar to PTSD. And there can be big relationship issues. Bitterness is considered a chronic nature and is considered altered thinking. There is no diagnosis right now in the DSM-5, but there has been one in the literature that has been proposed. Slide. So we have to talk a little bit about venting because it's interesting. Way long ago, Freud actually developed the catharsis theory. He said there's a hydraulic model of anger, that frustration leads to anger, and that anger, when it turns up, it becomes built up in a person, and it needs to be vented in order to dissipate. Well, it was actually disproved in the 1950s. What venting actually does is help you to practice aggressive behaviors, primes aggressive thoughts and feelings and behavioral tendencies. So you have to make a decision about venting and decide whether or not it's right for you. Next slide. So what does work in the midst of this? And the first thing we have to do is really understand that we've got to look at this with a new filter. We need to notice, we need to recognize, we need to work with the body, we need to work with thoughts, and we need to work with the environment, because there are built-in antidotes through the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the baseline of the body. Remember, the sympathetic nervous system is a deviation from that, and the parasympathetic nervous system is what helps to release protective hormones. This would be acetylcholine. It stops the arousal of anger, neutralizes stress hormones, and allows the body to relax and calm down. You can have a direct impact on the parasympathetic nervous system. Slide. So Emotion 101, when you're looking at emotion to come to a new understanding, we need to look at the body first. It often gives us the first clue. And so awareness of what's happening actually helps us to slow down the reactions that are happening and tap into that parasympathetic nervous system. It can also help us from a cognitive perspective to see things differently, have a different perspective. Awareness is a skill, because once again, we are distracted 50% of the time. So the brain actually resists this kinds of training. And so we have to work with it in a way that helps it to calm down and helps our minds to focus. Slide. So the biology of the body, once again, gives us wonderful clues. And once again, that awareness is the first antidote. So we've got to get really good at finding these, at looking at these and seeing them for what they are and calling them what they are. Ah, I seem to be angry right now. That's one of the tricks to the trade when it comes to anger, is that when you say right out loud, oh, I seem to be angry right now, it helps the emotion center to calm down and the logic center to re-engage. Remember that the amygdala has the power to shut down your prefrontal cortex. That's why you're in an altered state. So it is wildly important to really get good at noting and being aware of what's going on in the body. Trust the body when it comes to emotion. Next slide. So a couple of other tricks to the trade: get warm, seek social support. Once again, we're talking about oxytocin in the body. Do the things that help the body to learn to relax as well. We can learn to meditate. We can use mindfulness. We can use progressive relaxation. Now, one thing about getting support is that is a double-edged sword. It depends on how you use it. If you believe in that hydraulics view of anger, then remember, you're going to keep yourself, you're going to be practicing those angry tendencies. So finding relationships that work for you that really aren't about just saying over and over again the storyline, but it's about undermining the storyline, finding true emotional support, finding people who are really good at informational support, companionship, and financial assistance. Those might be different people depending on the situation. So find the person that closely matches your need at the time. Decide on this as a plan beforehand. Who's really good at this stuff? And then match it to the need at the time. Slide. Once again, looking at your behavior can be a wonderful tool in figuring out that you are actually angry or what's going on with you. Asking other people as well and listening to what they have to say about how you're coming across is a wonderful tool and technique in the midst of this. And then once again, finding antidotes in the environment. Really take a walk, move to a different part of the room, talk to people that aren't like you, listen well. There is a concept of three-centered listening where you not only listen to the facts that are going on in the conversation, but you find the feeling tone of the conversation as well. And then within your body, where it's reacting. So are you feeling this in your chest? Are you feeling this in your belly? That three-centered listening model helps you to be more with another person as you're interacting. And then, of course, join an advocacy group. Change the environment is another huge way. So in expressing yourself, one of the things that's wildly important is learning assertiveness skills. One of the ways of doing that is actually speaking to the emotion of the conversation. So I've given an example here. When I hear you say this, whatever that is, are you saying that you feel fill in the blank with one of the emotions? Mad, sad, glad, afraid. And so when you're using those kinds of techniques in the way that you're interacting with someone, you feel very heard, and it helps you to bond a little bit closer. And then, of course, cognitive therapy interventions. One of my favorites is the open hand technique. When you have something that is going on and over and again, and you're just so angry about it, and there's nothing you can do, and you feel powerless over the situation, it's an interesting thing. If I grab a pen and hold on to it and keep my hand closed with that pin in it, that pin is not really going to go anywhere. But if I open my hand and let the pen just sit directly on my hand, with time, I'm going to get distracted because that's our nature. Once again, we're distracted 50% of the time. And that pen at some point is going to fall. We can use that as a visualization technique, which is different than a meditation technique in the brain. And if you just imagine yourself opening your hand to a situation, allowing the situation to live right there in the palm, and then just continuously opening, that is a nice metaphor for the brain to start to do the same thing. So sometimes we do something physically to help the brain to do that intellectually. Next slide. The thought process. This you might need some help with. This you might have to have some extra assistance with. Please look at these angry thoughts. It is a skill. Remember that once again, you are in an altered state. As a result of being in that altered state, you actually attribute others' intentions more negatively. And that negativity dominance becomes a way of looking at things. This is in the literature. We've known that since 1998. Wildly important to remember that negativity bias is part of being human. And so the more we can open to it, really look for the things that we're saying to ourselves, believing this idea that 70% of the things that we think are not really all that helpful to us, then we can start to move towards this idea that everything we think doesn't actually have to matter quite so much, that we aren't everything that we think. And so we can start to learn to let go and to use a new filter. Once again, the idea here is to have a filter. Is this a helpful thought? Is this not a helpful thought? That is one of the most important questions you can ask in good psychology. Is this thought helpful or is it part of the 70%? Next slide. The storyline. Once again, this whole idea that we over and over again practice concepts and ideas. We internalize these stories as true. And a sense of justice can actually cause us a problem in our storyline because we get stuck in this idea of bitterness, like I can't do anything about it. But once again, having some tools and techniques around storyline, actually engaging optimism, looking from a completely different perspective, really seeing deeply into that storyline, asking how much of it is actually true, percentage-wise, can really help you. A very simple and oversimplified example is somebody who loaned money who never gave it back. We have a storyline about that in our heads. And so sometimes if you just take that idea and start to look at it as, oh my goodness, he's such a selfish person, I cannot believe him. You get the storyline going in that way. One of the questions you should always ask yourself is, how human is that response? How many people do you know that are selfish? How many people have you ever participated in selfish activities? Once that idea becomes human, it starts to change the power dynamic a little bit, and it becomes, instead of something that's awfulized, into something that is just a sense of being human. We can also change our relationship with failure. It's interesting when you look at psychology, both of these things have positive outcomes. One is doubling down on a situation, and the other is totally giving up. And they both have equal psychological benefit to you. So failure can equal freedom. Who knew? And so it's one of those things where once you start to look at this from these perspectives, you start to engage in choice. Choice is where it is at in the brain. And I only have a couple of more minutes, but I did want to say a little something on the next slide about hope. Hope is a skill. Remember that using techniques around hope actually help to engage the mind in that way. Remember, once again, since the storyline, we're distracted about 50% of this time, and the storyline is usually very negative, the more you are actively taking your mind from that negativity and putting it on something more hopeful, the more you are finding a way to work actively and creating a skill against bitterness. And so with my last minute, I just want to say one more thing about, and slide, please, sir, forgiveness. Remember that forgiveness is not really about condoning a behavior or saying that it's okay. It is also a process. And there's several models that are suggested in the literature. And then, of course, many of us have spiritual faiths that talk a lot about forgiveness as well. So when you're looking at forgiveness, remember that there is a whole lot of choice in it. And it really is about making a decision around actively turning your mind towards empathy and seeing, once again, behavior is very human, and allowing the other person the grace to have been wrong. Profound experience, forgiveness. And so last slide. Laughter, joy, gratitude, distraction, all of these things that you are already understand and know very, very well. And so I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Jhon, and he's going to help us to explore a little bit deeper into meditation as a tool to help us. Once again, Terry Pratchett said, just because it's not nice doesn't mean it's not miraculous. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christi. That was such a beautiful way of just putting it all together, for having us to think about this on many different levels. And I greatly appreciate you using the word energy. For those of you who have been in webinars with me or have seen presentations, I talk a lot about energy and what that energy is. And I often say that, we're all made up of energy, and our cells are constantly vibrating. That makes us who we are and part of who we are, especially the chemical reaction in our brain. So what I want us to focus on here are some of those principles of meditation that some of you might be aware of, have delved in, might have your own practice, or might have heard or seen folks doing meditation. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to do like a quick 5-minute just focusing on our breath and starting on those principles of meditation. So what we want to explore here is the combination of how does meditation and what are those principles of meditation and how they can alleviate that energy of anger. Right? And Christi talked a lot about that energy of anger and that beautiful metaphor about holding a pen in the hand. And if you hold the pen in the hand, pen's not going to go anywhere. But once you open up the hand, that pen is going to have that opportunity to just maybe leave the palm, or you can be free of yourself. So what meditation does is, because the brain is so locked on an image, on a thought, usually a thought of the past or a thought of the future, and rarely do we have that energy of focusing on the here and now. So what meditation does is it holds onto that thought, but once the mind begins to open and relax, it releases that energy and releases that pen that you're holding onto that could be so destructive. So it's about opening up the mind and looking at that energy from a different perspective. So that's what we're going to explore here. Next slide, please. There are many different ways to look at this. So what I want us to understand is, the question here is, how can meditation transform anger before it spirals out of control or becomes destructive, right? And, Christi talked a little bit about those principles and about those issues that happen, when we're holding on to anger too much. So the idea here is to catch that imagery, right? Catch that understanding of how the brain is holding on to that energy of anger and then letting it go. So we're trying to look at it through a different lens. And the lens that we're looking at here is mindfulness. And you'll hear mindfulness and meditation, and those two words acting interchangeably. So I'll be focusing on the word mindfulness and meditation throughout the rest of the presentation. But anger is simply an energy that is neither good nor bad. Anger is simply an energy that is neither good or bad. However, what you do with that anger, what you do with that energy, how you fuel it, how you hold on to it, how you become consumed by it, now that can be problematic. And that's when we start seeing those issues of, depression. We see those issues that manifest itself inside our bodies with headaches or muscle spasms or just not feeling comfortable. So the idea is to catch that before it manifests itself into something else that therefore becomes unhealthy and therefore can become bad. Next slide, please. So what we also want to understand is that, science is finally catching up to things that we've known for centuries, especially meditation. So there was a 2016 study in the Journal of Consciousness and Cognition that suggests that one session of meditation can actually help reduce the body's response to anger. So listen, if we would have done this presentation 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we would have talked about it and we would have had this information for you. But now that science is catching up, we now say, oh, wow, so it really must work, right? So there's a lot of great studies that are happening. And Jhon started doing, he's one of the pioneers of really connecting these two issues here. And Jhon started doing some of the studies up in Massachusetts about over 20 years ago. And there's still a lot more to understand. There's still a lot more that we're trying to understand of actually what happens and what are those chemical changes that are actually happening in the body, not just during the moments of mindfulness and meditation, but also the effects of it afterward. Next slide. So the study here also shows us that anger and frustration cause us to be stressed. As Christi talked about, it activates our sympathetic nervous system and produces shallower, faster breathing and a rapid heart rate. It also raises our blood pressure. So what the interesting thing here is meditation actually does the opposite of all this, right? So it's a really nice counterbalance to incorporate elements of meditation into your lives to help with these issues of anger. And I'll tell you a little bit about my dad, who taught me a lot about anger. But recently he was realizing that every time he would watch the news, his blood pressure would raise. He was having rapid heart rates, thought he was having a heart attack. And he realized that the thing that he had in common was that every time this happened, he was watching the news beforehand. So my stepmom, obviously said, maybe you don't need to go to the doctor, or maybe you need to stop watching the news, or being mindful of how much information you're actually putting into your brain. And this is something that a lot of folks that here in the United States that we're dealing with. We are getting constantly bombarded by energy, by misinformation, or just by too much information, and also trying to figure out what is real, what is not real, what is happening, what isn't happening. And we are at a pivotal point in history. But with those pivotal points comes a lot of energy. And sometimes we're feeling a lot of anger, especially with what we are dealing with right now. So anger actually will help us to take a time, dealing with these issues of anger with meditation gives us that opportunity to just step back for a minute, take that deep breath, focus, and get ourselves in a better place so we can use this energy in the best way possible. Next slide, please. So in this 2016 study, they found that just one session of meditation, just one 5-minute session of meditation actually helps reduce those physical signs that we were talking about with anger. And this is actually even with folks that are new to meditation. So the question is, give it a try. You might like it. You might actually realize those benefits. And you'll also please notice that the pictures that we have here, it's not always having to sit with your legs crossed, right? Meditation is just about being singly focused. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Next slide here. So after 20 minutes of meditation, people who have never done meditation before had a much calmer and more relaxed physical response when asked to re-experience anger. So the experiment here was putting them through a meditation, a 10 to 20 minute meditation, and then bringing up the imagery of anger and then measuring to see what was the body's response. And what was really nice about this is that the body was already prepared to activate, or better prepared to deal with this energy of anger. So meditation doesn't always have to happen once you're feeling that anger. But the idea of meditation is that if it's part of your practice, your body's ready and prepared to deal with energy that's coming towards it in order to it not manifest itself inside the body in a negative way. Next slide, please. So when any emotion rises up, we usually first get caught up in it, right? Our minds are just so focused on that quick, immediate response. So there's no thought behind it. There's no understanding through our speech of how it's going to, be affected, or our actions. And this happens both internally and externally. And this couldn't be truer with the heightened emotion of anger. So think about the last time you felt any of this energy of anger. And it doesn't have to be like true anger, but a part of a frustration, whether it was an email, a text, something that you read, or a conversation, and how our mind quickly goes and starts creating these stories. And Christi was, talked a little bit about that in terms of the stories that we create, that our mind just keeps going. And the meditation component helps us bring that mind back to being singly focused. Because the mind kind of wants to go this way, up and down and all around. And all we want to do is bringing it back to its main focus. And that focus is being in the moment. And you'll hear a lot of people, and when we do that meditation, you'll hear me talk a lot about the breath. So meditation can therefore teach us how to alter a quick and reactive mindset into a more focused, healthier, responsive, and productive state of mind. Next slide, please. So again, here we got, if you go to slide break before that, sorry. So here you see that these are just folks, some people can do the meditation on their own. Some people like to do meditation in a group. You don't have to go to the beach. You don't have to go to the mountains. You can do it right in your bed, on your sofa, on the floor through an app or through YouTube. And meditation is for everyone. We're starting to see in California that they're introducing meditation. They have already introduced meditation into a lot of the school systems, and that there's something doing that here also in New Jersey, where I reside. So it's for everyone, no matter what state you're in or no matter what stage you're in life. So it's something that's accessible to all of us. Next slide, please. So now we get to practice, right? So all I'm going to ask you to do, and we're going to take just a few minutes, is what I want you to do at this moment is just settle into yourself. What does that actually mean? We're so focused on doing things. Sometimes we forget that doing nothing is actually doing something. Doing nothing is actually doing something. And in this case, the doing nothing is going to help you become a little bit more centered, alleviate some of these issues that we've been talking about today, and also perhaps help you find a little bit more balance so you can be a little bit more focused. So we're going to focus on breathing, we're going to focus on posture, we're going to focus on being in the moment. So I'm going to ask you to do is just, be mindful of in any position that you're in, whether if you're sitting or laying down, just settle into yourself, taking your hands and bring them on your knees or on your lap, palms down or palms up. Just be mindful of where your feet are. If you're wearing shoes, sneakers, barefoot sandals. Just bring your focus towards your toes. Just pressing your toes, pressing the balls of your feet into the earth. Now bring your focus towards your spine and lean it back into your chair. Or if you're laying on the ground, which is great, just feel your shoulders pressing into the earth, or bring your shoulders and press them into your chair. Bring your chin parallel with the earth. And if you're comfortable, slowly close your eyes or bring your eyes to a nice soft gaze and just breathe. Deep inhale, filling the belly, and deep exhale. One more time, take a nice deep inhale. And just be mindful of where you're feeling the oxygen coming into your body, whether it's through your nose, the back of your throat, your chest, your belly. And as you exhale, feeling that release of energy. Again, taking another deep inhale and another deep exhale. And as those thoughts come into your mind, just acknowledge those thoughts and then let them go. Imagining as if those thoughts are just clouds in the sky. Within a few breaths, they will dissipate. And you'll find that focus within. Bringing your focus towards your eyebrows as you relax the eyebrows. Relax the jaw. Feeling that space between your lips. Feel free to bring the corners of your mouth up a little bit, creating a beautiful smile. Deep inhale, and deep exhale. Bringing your focus now towards your fingertips. Just be mindful if your fingertips are touching your lap or your knees, or if your fingertips are just up towards the sky. Bringing your awareness towards that point. Another deep inhale. And another deep exhale, and just finding your groove with your breath. Slowly bring your awareness towards that last time you might have felt a little bit of frustration, a little bit of anger, or a lot of anger. Just see where and how your body's reacting at this moment. Where you might feel some heat, where you might feel some tightness. And just breathe into that part. Sometimes it's in our chest, so just breathe deeply into the chest. And then let it go. Letting go of judgment, letting go of problem solving, letting go of all that as you just bring your focus back towards the breath. Knowing that at every moment in your life, every moment in your day, every moment of your hour, you have the opportunity to reflect upon what is happening in your physical self as you bring your focus towards your breath to help alleviate that energy, to help alleviate the manifestation of your body, of the energy that is around you. Knowing that you have much more control than you realize. And that the only moment that's most important is this moment now. This breath, as we take a nice deep breath, inhale and exhale. Slowly bring your awareness towards the sounds around your space, around your home. As you begin to wiggle your fingertips, your mouth, and your nose. And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes. So thank you for participating in that. And what we want you to understand is just being mindful of how you're feeling right now if you went through that exercise. And knowing that what we just did, and all it was just focusing on the breath and focusing on the physical self. That if you're in a meeting or you're reading an email, as Christi was saying, you can walk away, walk to a different space. You don't always have to answer or have an answer. So give yourself permission to take time for yourself before you respond to that text or that argument. It's okay, and it's more than okay. It's actually healthy to walk away, regroup yourself, connect with yourself, and then move forward. But you have more control within all this. And yes, we know that it is difficult, especially what we are occurring through right now in history. But it is possible. And the more we practice this, the more we practice on being mindful, the easier it gets. So whether you're by the beach or in the mountains or just walking in the city, find that opportunity just to take a deep breath in and just observe the body. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Jhon. Thanks, Christi. We appreciate that. We do have some questions that came in if you're okay with answering some of these. As a person with hemophilia and a senior citizen, I'm in constant pain. That creates anger, and I have trouble controlling that. Is there anything that person can do for that?
Absolutely. Remember, once again, when we are talking about pain, we're talking about the same stress cycle that these interventions can help with. You know, pain's an interesting thing because there's a certain point where it's like, I can't take the sensations anymore, you know? And so you take a pill or you take a nap or you distract yourself or whatever in order to try to intervene with the actual sensations of pain. But the anger is something that needs to be looked at directly. The anger is something, once again, because we're talking about the pleasure center getting stimulated in the midst of the pain. What an antidote, right? Like, it's an antidote to pain to get angry, right? So it is wildly important to remember, though, that when you're using anger as a fulcrum to get this energy boost, it unfortunately impacts your relationships, and it has all these side effects in the body, the stress cycle side effects that we went through, right? So having some kind of plan around pain, having some kind of plan around anger, once again, talking to a therapist, pulling this out, actually saying right out loud, you know, when I'm in pain, I'm angry. You know, it's interesting. One of the things that I've heard throughout my career at HOG is I don't always tell my hematologist everything about my pain, right? I don't tell anybody. Like, I, as a social worker, hear sometimes more about what's going on with a person's pain than the actual medical doctor does. I am a huge part of the team, let me hear you say, right? But we've got to have a medical intervention for pain, psychological interventions for pain. It turns out that mindfulness-based stress reduction and cognitive therapy actually can decrease pain symptoms by about 50%. If we're stacking that on top of what's going on with our pain medication, imagine where we can get to. But it's a dedication. It's a willingness to work with somebody else. It's a willingness to learn the skills. It's a willingness in mindfulness. We call it beginner's mind. A willingness to open an idea open that there might be something new or different that might work just as well as a pain medication. Jhon, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I mean, what you just said was so beautifully stated and perfect. The only other thing that I would add is there are different types of meditation and mindfulness practices. And there are a lot of great folks that are doing this, and especially now in our states that we're in. You can definitely find great stuff on the internet. There's a couple of apps that actually also have websites. Two that I actually like a lot is one is called Headspace. They do great work. And they also have different types of meditations and mindfulness, from like 2 minutes to like 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And then also the Calm app also has some really good ones. I'm actually doing one on stress management. It's a 7-day meditation. Also, you can look at Oprah Winfrey and Deepak Chopra offer a lot of great free meditation practices, and they're all free. So there's different levels that you can do. So it's about exploring what are those elements that are out there that are readily for you. And I mentioned yoga. Yoga could be part of that, but also Tai Chi, exploring that energy. So it's again, how do we deal with that energy of anger? Because it's a very natural energy, and how do we prevent it from manifesting in our bodies? So there's different ways to explore that. But that's a really great question. Thank you for asking it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Another question that came in, Jhon, start with you. Can I meditate anywhere, in a public setting, but in a private way?
Yes, it's a beautiful question. You know, as a New Jersey, New Yorker, one of my favorite places to meditate is actually a Penn Station. So those of you who are familiar with Penn Station, there's just thousands of people at one point. But what I usually do is when I take the train into New York and go to the office, I have to go through Penn Station. So before I leave Penn Station, I actually take about 1 minute. And it's amazing how long a minute actually is. But I actually take about 1 minute and just find a space, whether it's up against a wall, a pillar, or just standing in the middle, and just close my eyes. And because it's New York, nobody cares, but close my eyes and just take a deep breath and just center myself and, you know, understand where I'm at. Mindfulness is about just bringing your focus to that current moment. So yes, so whether if it's in a busy area, whether if it's, you know, I don't know if you can do it in a meeting because you want to be present in the meeting, but walking away from the meeting, going into the hallway and just catching your breath, doing a few of these exercises that we did or that are out there. So it doesn't always have to happen in the privacy of your space. That is optimal because you want to have less noises that are affecting you, but it can be done anywhere. Absolutely.
And remember, there's more than one object. You know, we can use the breath, we can use the body as an object. Walking meditation is actually a very useful tool as well. And then there is loving kindness as well. I drive a lot with my job, and literally as I'm driving up and down the road, I'm doing a particular kind of repetition. May I be safe and protected. May I be happy and peaceful. May I be strong and healthy. May I live with ease. Once again, since we've got that negativity bias that lives within us as normal humans, if we're actively taking our toes out of that undercurrent and we're doing something different with our mind, that is what we're talking about. These are focus techniques. These are concentration techniques. So anything you can do to concentrate, and it doesn't even have to be with your eyes closed and on the breath. There are lots of different objects so that you can choose in order to do this skill of focusing the mind.
And it's interesting you say that, Christi, about driving. So many of us, when we're driving, we're thinking about where we've been, what we have to do, and we actually forget that we're actually really driving. And how many times have you driven and you've gotten to the where you needed to get to, and you ask yourself, how did I get here? So one of the techniques is about remembering you are driving, remembering that there's a car in front of you. So acknowledging what are those things that are around you, it helps you become more in the present moment. So whether it's not reading so much bumper stickers, but noticing the car in front of you, noticing the car behind you, as we should be very alert when we're driving, or when you're washing dishes. This is one of my favorite things that the Dalai Lama said. When you're washing dishes, are you truly washing your dishes, or are you actually thinking about something else? Most of the times, we're thinking about something else. So are you actually feeling the soap on your hand? Are you actually feeling the plate that you're washing, or the texture of the water, or the warmth or the coldness of the water? Those are things that you just bring your attention to that helps you become in the moment, and then actually helps you forget what you were actually thinking about. But it's a challenge, right? So we call it a practice. And we call it a practice because it takes time to keep moving forward, whether you've been meditating for one day or you've been meditating for 20 years, it's still a practice. So, thank you for bringing that up, Christi. Yeah, there's many different ways to bring this into your daily lives.
We have to redefine success with meditation as well. One of the things people talk about is, well, I couldn't empty my mind for 30 seconds or however long you've decided to meditate. That's not really the goal. You've been a successful, quote unquote, meditator when you notice that your mind is wandering, you've captured it, and you've brought it back. That is the actual skill of meditation. It's not really this airy-fairy thing. It's a very practical thing. Oh, I noticed my mind was wandering. Oh, I'm bringing it back to the object I've chosen. That's why we choose an object: driving, walking, breathing, body scan. Whatever the object is not really what's important. Like, could you keep your mind on your body for an hour long? No, it's the noticing your mind was wandering, capturing it, bringing it back. And if you are capturing it, bringing it back, you've had a successful time. You've been successful at your meditation.
Great. Thank you. Some really good advice in there. Another question that's come in, and I think you both touched on this a little bit when you had the opportunity to, but I'll bring it up anyway. I think it's something certainly worth talking about here. If my anger is too much to handle, should I remove myself from the situation that is creating my frustrations? Can I pull away, or should I pull away? Christi, you want to start?
Absolutely. That is absolutely one tool in the shed. But once you're away, the challenge is, what are you going to do next? If you just go to the drink, the smoke, the drug, the food, whatever it is that further distracts you, then you don't really have a tool or technique. So getting away, but then using something that's next. You can use the hope practice. Oh, I hope the next time I'm in that situation, I'll be able to handle that better, right? You can assess the situation. What was it about that created quite that much anger? Was it something that reminded me of something else? Was it I was in pain, physical pain, and that's why my anger was so out of control? So yes, remove yourself, but don't let that be the only tool in the shed. Otherwise, you're missing a lovely opportunity to look directly at and handle pain handle anger in a very different kind of way.
Yeah, it's how you alleviate that energy. And, meditation may not be it. It might be it. But it's how else can you bring in another form of energy to help combat without going to the drug, the smoke, or something else, or reacting, with that anger to somebody else. You mentioned laughter, Christi.
Yeah.
Most of us, if not the majority of us, have at least one cell phone with us. And, I'll admit I'm a big meme guy. So memes help me just laugh. Right. So what are the things that you can bring into that moment to help just you refocus and rechannel that energy? So you're not going always to something that could be potentially.
Great. Thank you. I think we're bumping up against our time here, and I don't see any other questions, but I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Christi and Jhon, for taking the time this afternoon. We certainly appreciate your time and your expertise. And I'd also like to thank each and every one of you for joining us and participating. One quick reminder, the 2020 Bleeding Disorders Conference has gone virtual and will be held on August 1st through August 8th. Registration is open and free of charge to everyone, so please go to hemophilia.org to register. Please note that this recorded webinar will be available on Monday, June 29th in the COVID-19 section on the hemophilia.org page. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Jhon and Christi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Christi.